Hi. So we've reached the end of this section. So let me give you a quick recap of what we've covered so far. And if any of this is not absolutely clear to you, then you should go back to the corresponding lectures and review them again. Because it's important going forward that you really have a clear understanding of what I'm recapping here. So let's start with a class circle. And we can create an instance of that circle class by calling it. So C now is an instance of circle. Now here we define this origin attribute, and it's a class attribute, right? So we can reference it using circle.origin. We could also reference it using an instance.origin. We'd get the same thing back. And it's a class attribute. If we change it for the class, it will change basically for all instances, because all instances of that class are instances of that same class. Now we have this init method. So now we're providing a custom initializer, which means that this initializer over here will no longer work because it expects a single value r. Okay, so here we've created a custom initializer. It is an instance method. It is bound to the instance because the init, remember, gets called after the instance has been created. So then it gets called as a bound method, and we're defining _r as an instance attribute on the instance. And it's private, but by convention only. That leading underscore is a convention to indicate private variables. But we can still access it. We can use c._r. It's still in the class namespace, in the object namespace. Then we have static methods. So we can use a decorator called addStaticMethod. And this basically is not going to be bound to anything, no matter how we call it. If we call it from the class or we call it from the instance, it will not be bound. It will just be a plain function. In this case, here's maybe a good use case for it. We use that to generate new instances of the circle class. Okay. Then we have the class method. So this class method is going to be a method that will be bound to the class, no matter how it gets called, either from the class or from the instance. And in this case, we're going to modify the origin, which is a class attribute from this class method, and we'll set it to x and y that gets passed in. So class method bound to the class. You can call it from the class, but it can also be called from an instance. It will have the same effect. Now we have this double radius, for example. That's an instance method. It'll be bound to the instance when it gets called from the instance. So if we call C, which is an instance.double radius, it's going to look at C's _r and then, multiply it by 2 and replace it. And then lastly, we have these property decorators. Here I'm defining a radius property, and this is going to be the getter function. I decorate it with the @property decorator. And if I want to define the setter, I can use the @radius.setter and use the same name for the functions, for the function that I'm going to use to be the setter for this particular property. So those are called instance properties because they are affecting the instance data, and they're bound. These methods, radius, this radius here and this radius here, are actually called as bound methods to the instance. Okay, so that's kind of, in a very quick nutshell, kind of the more important stuff that we covered in this section. And it's really important that you understand the distinctions between all these things and kind of how they work, what the bindings are, and where things are living, what namespaces, class namespace, instance namespace, all that is important to understand as we move forward. So, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next section.